Matt, there's some quotes that Lincoln Riley made this week, and I am accessing these per Antonio Morales of The Athletic. Just want to get your thoughts. I don't know if you've seen these quotes. I
Seen
don't
some of them.
necessarily I don't necessarily think that there's anything that's obviously, controversial or reading into anything in particular, but with your insight into it much more than myself, I'm just curious to get your thoughts. Lincoln Riley here, quote, I think it starts, and this is addressing the defensive coordinator and the defense as a whole in particular, folks. Quote, I think it starts with me. We have to get the right coordinator. We've got to surround him with the right staff. We've got to continue to build the talent base. We've got to really look at it. What are we doing defensively to put our guys in the best position possible to play well? That's a schematic question. It's a mentality question, fundamental question. It's how we practice. It's how we train them. I don't think there's any part of it where you're like, this is good enough.
So some of that is generalized coach speak, but there are some really noteworthy bits, and one is changing how we practice. Ding, ding, ding. Like that is something that Tim Prangley and I focused on our call-in shows the past few Sundays after the USC's last few games of the season. That it's not just you're not just bringing in a new defensive coordinator to replace Alex Grinch. The operational philosophy, the operational approach, how you organize and structure your practices, your meetings, your communication, your teaching, your player development, your strength and conditioning, how all of that gets done the way it has been done is not working. And that is such an important point. And it brings up this specific item in the defensive coordinator search that, of course, Lincoln Riley and Jen Cohen are going to ask the candidates questions. How would you do this? How would you do that? What's your overview of everything? But these candidates, they're also going to ask Lincoln Riley and Jen Cohen questions. And of course, if you're Jim Leonard or if you're Tom Allen or if you're anyone who is in that interview room and you're smart and you want to make sure that this job works for you and that you're in the best possible position to succeed, you're going to ask Lincoln Riley, hey, Benny Wiley, he doesn't seem to be meeting the mark. He doesn't seem to be creating tough players. I don't think I'd take this job unless you sack him and you replace him with, well, it could be anyone, but chances are an incoming defensive coordinator will have a recommendation for a strength coach that he would want to have brought in. That's a very important part of this process, that either Wiley gets fired and replaced, which that's my preference. I've been on the record as saying that. But let's say Wiley gets retained. All right, let's say Benny Wiley is kept on. If Benny Wiley is retained, the same methods and processes and procedures cannot remain in place. So Wiley would have to be required to make adjustments. And the new defensive coordinator might be able to insist on having some say or maybe total say in terms of, this is how I want my defensive players to be developed in the weight room. So you could keep Benny Wiley, but he has to execute my plan, Lincoln. You can't just do it the way you want it. That is a huge, huge part of this. So either you kick Benny Wiley to the curb, which frankly, it's easier, right? You bring in a new guy with a new way of doing things. But if we accept as a hypothetical, just going along for the sake of discussion and argument, that Lincoln Riley wants to retain Benny Wiley and the defensive coordinator is willing to go along with it to a point, Wiley can't be allowed to just do things his own way or Lincoln Riley's way. There has to be a meeting of the minds in the middle where the defensive coordinator extracts at least some concessions in terms of, all right, Lincoln, you want to retain Benny Wiley? Fine, but I need to insist on, if Benny Wiley's a strength and conditioning guy, he knows how to train people in different ways. He can adjust to certain kinds of athletes, certain body types, certain position players, linebacker versus a corner versus a safety versus a defensive lineman. I need Benny Wiley to do things differently compared to how he has been doing. There has to be some kind of significant operational, methodological change if Benny Wiley gets retained. And that is an absolutely central part of this defensive coordinator interview process.
And so, Matt, in the second portion of this quote, he hits on Lincoln Riley, some of the things that are less about football on the practice field and more about in the training room, when he says, there's a pecking order. Starts with the coordinator, down to the staff, then to the scheme, then to how we train, the body types, the evaluations, the recruiting, the development, the practice.
So that's kind of murky, right? Like, does that mean that like the coordinator just supersedes everything? Does that mean that the coordinator has autonomy to run the defense how he sees fit? And like, so does the defensive coordinator dictate to the strength and conditioning coach how things get done? I mean, maybe that's what Lincoln Riley is trying to say, but Benny Wiley and Lincoln Riley are joined at the hip. And let's remind everybody, especially those who are not from Oklahoma, that Riley, when he stepped into the head coaching position at Oklahoma in 2017, he inherited Bob Stoops' longtime OU strength coach, Jerry Schmidt. And then he had him for 1 year, and Oklahoma had a great 2017 season, but then Lincoln Riley wanted Benny Wiley in for 2018. So like there's definitely, we talk about the loyalty between Lincoln Riley and Alex Grinch, even more so with Benny Wiley. At the start of 2018, Grinch wasn't hired until later. So that the loyalty of that relationship is also going to be tested here, and it's really interesting to see how the Lincoln Riley Benny Wiley relationship is going to evolve in and through this defensive coordinator search. And this is the great unknown, but will a top defensive coordinator candidate tell Lincoln Riley and Jen Cohen in that interview room? We don't know, but like, interviews should be going on now as we speak. Is a top candidate going to say, you know what, I'm not working for you, Lincoln Riley, unless you fire Benny Wiley? We don't know if that is happening right now, but it's like when we get the revelation of the defensive coordinator hire in 2, 3, 4, however many days, and reports come to light about the negotiations, it's going to be fascinating to find out what was and wasn't said behind closed doors, and how much anybody is going to reveal about any of that.
And to read into this, my next thought goes to, I wonder how much Lincoln Riley has a concept of and has his own methodology on the defensive side of the ball, that this is the way things should be done. Now let's hire someone. I'm open to hear their new ideas and we can work together on this, versus just kind of like, I don't know, it's the defense. Hire a defensive coordinator, let him figure it all out. I'm sure Nick Saban, Kirby Smart's a defensive guy, but even bring offensive minded guys that have been overall successful. I'm sure that they have, tenets that they want in place, even if it's not, quote unquote, their side of the ball.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think the answer, though, is very clear that, Alex Grinch, if anything, in terms of just how schematically, he was often too complicated. It's not that his stuff was too simple. It was too complex. You had players overthinking and not just, naturally read, react, go after it. It was not a defense in which guys were just naturally turned loose. They were very instinctive, fluid in how they processed plays. No, they were looking at wristbands before snaps. They were confused. They were hesitant. And it's because their minds were cluttered. Like that's a lot of people who follow USC will tell you, guys were overthinking. They had too much information. The scheme was too complicated. a lot of times, what's the solution? You simplify it. Go play football, attack, hit, tackle, wrap up. So Grinch made the game too complicated. And so, the best coaches, like the Nick Sabans, the elites, the best of the best, they will, look at their personnel and they will tailor what they're doing tactically and schematically to the talent that they have, to the skill sets that they have. The bad coaches will say, here's my system. You, the player, have to conform to what I want done and how I want it done. The great coaches, they're able to adjust. Like Saban was the guy who played that, coached in that 9-6 LSU Alabama game in 2011, and then in a similar rock fight in the national championship game 1 month later. Like, he could win national championships in the mud, the way Bear Bryant did in the 60s and 70s at Alabama. But then a decade later in 2020, he's winning it with Star Wars offense, with the 48 points per game attack, with Mac Jones, Devontae Smith, Najee Harris. He won that 52-46 SEC championship game against Dan Mullen, Kyle Trask, and Kyle Pitts in Florida. And Saban, famously said, is this what we want football to be, with the RPOs and the spread concepts and all this newfangled stuff? Like, Saban, he is an old-time guy. He wants to win 17-10 with defense. But did he stick to that as an article of faith in much the same way that Dabo, refuses to embrace the transfer portal, refuses to embrace modernity? No, Saban's always evolving. He's always willing to adjust. If this is how I have to stay on top in my profession, I'm willing to do it. There is just a willingness to do whatever it takes to win. And so this is all a longer way of saying specific schematic components should not matter to Lincoln Riley or USC in a defensive coordinator search. If a guy knows defense inside and out, if he's a stud, if he's excellent at coaching defense and getting great defensive results, like he can take, this type of player and make him succeed. He can take a very different type of player and make him succeed. It's less about having a schematic approach. It's more about just being able to take a player and maximize what he does. That's coaching. You don't impose a scheme on a player. You unlock the player's talent by fitting the scheme to the player. So it's just about hiring someone who's excellent. And that's why Jim Leonard, it is and should be the top candidate, because Jim Leonard is just plain excellent. Jim Leonard just consistently cranked out great defenses at Wisconsin. And let's keep in mind, he cranked out great defenses at Wisconsin with, less than fabulous offenses. It's not as though Wisconsin had a large margin for error in the games it plays. Like, you look at, like, it's similar to what Phil Parker does at Iowa every week.
Less than
Iowa has such a small
recruiting
margin for error and is always able to succeed. Like, Jim Leonard's that same kind of guy. And so you bring him to Lincoln Riley's offense at USC, boy, you have a much larger margin for error with Jim Leonard. It's just a fantastic pairing if USC can pull it off.
Yeah, that is the question when you see somebody excel at a place like that, because not only do they not have the offensive support, they also don't have the recruiting opportunities that USC does. So look at the list of NFL players that have been produced on the defensive side of the ball at Wisconsin. Most of those guys, none of them are 5 stars. Very few of them are 4 stars. They are churning out 3 stars and making them NFL players along the defensive front, linebacker in particular. What you were talking about in regards to a guy that knows defense making adjustments, it brings to mind Jim Knowles and the questions that he was given when he left Oklahoma State. And he was very upfront about saying, well, we will see, because I'm going to be working with the best athletes that I've ever worked with. And he rolled out a defense that was all or nothing, boom or bust in 2022. And 90% of the time it worked. But when it didn't work, it was fatal. So those 3 or 4 busted plays a game cost them probably a national championship. Well, he comes back this season, changes his scheme, changes the approach, and gets much better results.
Absolutely. Like you don't just stick with the scheme because like that's what you prefer or that's what you're comfortable with. No, you're always looking at the skill sets of the players you have in that room. How can I get the most out of every player in that room? That's what a good coach fundamentally does. So like if you're just saying this is how I do it, this is our method, this is our plan, and we're not going to deviate from it, like that is a closed mind. That is an unwillingness to tailor whatever you're doing to the personnel, and that is a recipe for failure. And I mean, I know this is, we're talking about football, but I think let's just do a little digression here and go to basketball for a moment. Like the great basketball coaches, like obviously, you have to teach effort and you have to have a certain degree of just basic competence in terms of, getting a player's technique, like your defensive position and your footwork. Like there are overarching principles, but like the great basketball coaches, they know when to throw in a 1-3-1 half court zone trap, or they know when to, they'll go with a triangle and 2 for like 5 minutes and they'll just completely throw an offense out of joint. Like, you have all your tools in the toolbox. That's the point I'm making, that you have such mastery of X's and O's that it's not so much I have a scheme and a method. It's that I can deploy any method. I can deploy any tactic, any approach when needed in a specific situation to get the most out of my team. So that's the thing. If you have complete mastery of defense, it shouldn't be reliant on one scheme, one set of tactics. It's that everything. You can deploy any kind of philosophy. You can shift as needed. Like, what if a couple defensive linemen get injured? What then? Like, okay, so I'm gonna use fewer down linemen. I'm gonna have more guys sitting back in coverage, or I'm going to have a more linebacker heavy alignment, and I can realign the Rubik's cube, to fit whatever the situation is. So like that just hammers home the point. It's less about having a specific scheme. It's more about, can a guy make all sorts of adjustments to fit individuals, to fit position groups, and of course to fit the whole product of a defense.
USC fans should be able to appreciate Pat Riley going from Showtime in LA to a decade later taking the rock fight style to the New York Knicks and winning those 79-77 slugfests with the Miami Heat.
That's right. Being able to win in different ways, right? Yeah. And so like and that's part of the point, that Jim Leonard, he's used to playing in a lot of those 17-14 rock fights, but now you give him a Lincoln Riley offense and a new way. Who thinks Jim Leonard would be out of place with that? Like it gives Jim Leonard even more margin, if anything else, and he will know how to make the pieces of the puzzle fit. He'll know how to realign that Rubik's cube.
Jeff Rodriguez, we appreciate the contribution, sir. Matt, why Tom Allen? 90s something defense? No thanks.
Well, so Jeff, before Tom Allen became head coach at Indiana, he was defensive coordinator at Indiana, and he was getting good results out of his defenses. And Mark made the point earlier in terms of what Jim Leonard had done at Wisconsin, taking 2-3-star guys and taking them to the NFL. Tom Allen did something similar at Indiana. Remember Micah McFadden, star linebacker for the Hoosiers? Like, not a superstar type recruit, but, coached up, developed into a really fine player. But like Tom Allen, like he's taking table scraps at Indiana. Like you give him USC talent, you give him, 4-star type talents. You give him like a Tackett Curtis to coach. Like that it's a completely different ballgame. So you know, Allen did well as a defensive coordinator before he became a head coach, which is a different deal, compared to being a coordinator. You give Tom Allen USC level talent, but also Tom Allen knows these Big Ten offenses. He knows how to throw them out of joint. And, if you look at Indiana, obviously not a good team, but, Indiana gave Penn State a scare. That game was extremely close. And Indiana's been Louisville and Indiana, I think, beat Michigan at least once in the past 4 or 5 years.
In the Louisville game this year, they had a goal line play on 4th and inches, or they tie the game with seconds left against a team that's playing in the ACC championship game.
Yeah. So you give Tom Allen the USC talent, but also it's so crucial. This is why Leonard's my number 1 and Allen's my number 2. You're going to the Big Ten. You want guys who, know how to stop Big Ten offenses. And like USC fans, you've all watched these Big Ten offenses, I'm sure, in mornings and early afternoons before watching USC late at night. Like, you get Tom Allen with USC talent and USC resources against a lot of these Big Ten offenses. Sign me up. That is a favorable equation for USC. And the fact that Tom Allen was not a good head coach, that doesn't change that he was a really good coordinator, under Kevin Wilson, before, Kevin Wilson ran into problems and Tom Allen was elevated to the head coaching spot in Bloomington. He was a really good coordinator. And, people who follow Indiana will tell you Tom Allen, not a good head coach, but like his defensive acumen, in terms of, being able to come up with really good blitz tactics, stunts, twists, blitzes to get pressure at the quarterback. Like, Tom Allen is really good at being able to do that. So the overall Indiana numbers in the past few years with Allen being head coach doesn't really provide a full window into how good a defensive coordinator he would be. Like, you also look at Dave Aranda. Like, you look at how he's coaching Baylor as a head coach. It's not going well, but head coach and coordinator, like, we have to remember how you do as a head coach is not a reflection of how you do as a coordinator. We have to realize those are two very different things, because coordinator, you're a specialist. One side of the ball, that's your whole focus. Head coach, you're not just looking at a whole team, but you have the media obligations and the recruiting and so many other things that go into a head coach. It takes a unique skill set to be able to hold all of that together. Defensive coordinator, you have so much less on your plate. Not that you don't have a huge set of responsibilities, but compared to a head coach, it's such a different job. And so defensive numbers as a head coach definitely need to be separated from defensive numbers as a coordinator.
Let's also understand that, and I don't pretend to have the answers, because there are complexities to why a coach succeeds or fails at a particular stop. But when Tom Allen transitioned from defensive coordinator to head coach, once 2019 and 2020 hit, he's up on Tennessee by 2 touchdowns in the Gator Bowl, blows that game by 1 point. They still have an 8-5 season, but they're that close to going 9-4. The next season, he's got a capable quarterback, or better than that, in Michael Penix. They have a 6-2 season. They finished number 12 in the country. So he had back-to-back, and those are with mostly Kevin Wilson's players. And then when his recruiting kicked in, it went south these last 3 years. So maybe it was a recruiting issue that he wasn't able to maintain that kind of talent. But he did succeed for 2 years at Indiana. And let's understand, we're not talking about somebody stepping in at a Wisconsin or somewhere where it was winning coach, and then all of a sudden this person didn't get the job done. Indiana has not won a bowl game for 30 years. Nobody's winning at Indiana.
Not since Bill Mallory.
Yes.
Yeah. It's a very hard place to win. But Tom Allen hasn't been a coordinator in several years. He hasn't forgotten about how to be really good on defense. And again, You're giving him, like, I go back to the Bill Parcells comments about the groceries and who cooks and who shops, in terms of acquiring talent. Well, so Tom Allen wasn't good at getting the groceries, at shopping, at Indiana. But if you give him good groceries, if you Lincoln Riley at USC can give Tom Allen some good groceries on defense, he'll cook a really good meal. That's the analogy there. That you're not asking Tom Allen to be the home run hitter on the trail. You're hoping that if players know that if you're coached on defense by Tom Allen, you're going to go to the NFL, like a Micah McFadden or another defensive prospect. You're going to get elite level coaching. That's the sales pitch. That's the driver there. And then you fill out your defensive staff with your recruiters at the other positions. And that's another thing that let's revisit the Dante Williams angle. That Dante Williams could recruit really well, but the level of coaching that he provided, didn't match his recruiting acumen. So, Tom Allen, we're not going to say that he's a rock star recruiter. No, but having Tom Allen on board and being able to say, like, this, you get the best teaching from Tom Allen. If we live in a world, of course, where Jim Leonard turns down USC because he wants an NFL job or a college head coaching job. If Jim Leonard says no, and then Tom Allen's the second choice, and USC, is in a position to land Tom Allen, USC can then say, hey, here's that elite teacher of defense that you, a defensive prospect at Bosco, Mater Dei, elsewhere in Southern California, you want an elite defensive coach? We got him. So like that, Tom Allen's not going to be like pounding the trail so much as having Tom Allen is going to be a recruiting mechanism in and of itself. And the recruiting mechanism is, here's the quality of coaching that you, as a defensive prospect in Southern California or elsewhere in the country, you didn't think you were going to get that with Alex Grinch, and you were correct. But now we have that elite teacher, and then you can surround Tom Allen with recruiting studs, at like your secondary coach, your linebacker coach. Those guys can be the recruiting speed demons, but you have Tom Allen as the X and O genius on the defensive side of the ball. Perfectly fine arrangement to check all the different boxes that USC needs to check in terms of defense, in terms of recruiting, in terms of player development, in terms of getting back to the national championship standard.
Folks, as you see on the screen there, we've got USC channel YouTube memberships available. So you are already right here where you need to be to get a channel membership here on the USC channel. Those feature segments from Matt and myself that we churned out over the past year. We've got about 13 or 14 segments available. And again, these are tremendous conversations. I am telling you, you can let us know if you are disappointed in any way, because we are that confident that we just brought forth some excellent storylines, narratives, scenarios involving sometimes college football and related those to the USC situation. So you'll want to check out those bonus segments as a YouTube channel member right here on the USC channel.